Hi everyone and welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, and we would also like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We're going to bring our fantastic guest Yori on in just a moment. So we're over at behance.net/live, and if you want to come along and say hello, if you're watching on YouTube, jump over there. We can have a chat today. We're here for an hour. And without further ado, let's bring on our guest, Yori Narpati. Yori, how are you going?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me back on Adobe Live. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while. Like now that we've been talking about doing it kind of all year, and I'm so glad that we could finally get you back on. Last time we had so much fun. We spent a lot of time, did this like environment illustration. By that I mean like a whole like kind of scene.
Yeah.
With all this fantastic perspective drawing, and then your character illustration, which I think so many people love your work, myself included. You can see some of it behind us here. It's been far too long since we've had you back on. So very excited to hang out with you today and also on Thursday. So maybe for people that aren't as familiar with your work as we are, maybe you could give us like the elevator pitch. What's the short version that you tell people? You're a concept artist, illustrator, you have all this wide like range of skills. So what do you tell people you do?
So I am a freelance concept artist and illustrator. I am currently residing in Jakarta, Indonesia. I went to study in Sydney for animation, for both 3D and 2D animation. But I'm currently mostly doing like concept art, illustration. I'm currently actually doing a book illustration, a children's book illustration. That was like a Kickstarter project and it's still ongoing, which is fully funded now. Thank goodness.
Wow, and congratulations.
It's probably, it's like fully funded in like 3 days, which is pretty crazy. And I'm going to be finishing that project in about 2 weeks. But that's what I'm currently doing now.
Oh wow! Oh, we're gonna have to find a link to that. That sounds super cool. Check it out. How long has that process been from deciding that you're going to, because even using Kickstarter or something like that is a big decision, and then to finally finishing it? How long's that process been?
The book itself isn't actually by me. Like I was just like hired on as an illustrator. The author is Lindley Joyner, and there's an art director as well, John Cavallaro, and we've been working together like the past 2.5 months. So roughly just the beginning of this year we've started. It's actually been a pretty like fast-paced project just because they don't have a lot of time, and they need to get it out like as soon as possible. So it's been actually pretty fast-paced. It's been a really good experience.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Well, maybe we could bring up some of your work, like website or Instagram before we get started, so we can check out some of your fantastic work. And just a reminder, if you're just joining us, I know a whole bunch of people join us since we've started. We're using, we're at behance.net/live today, hanging out. Let us know where you're from in chat. If you're anywhere in Australia, we hope you're doing okay. It's pouring with rain. Parts of Australia that only a year ago were being burnt by bushfire, and now half of it is underwater. So hope if you're in any of those areas, you're doing all right. It is absolutely pouring where I am here, but I'm in the city, so nice and safe. But here we are, jumping over to your website. Wow, super cool.
So I'll probably just go through these like really quickly. So these are some of the work that I mainly do. I do a lot of like illustrations stuff like this, and like character work as well. I've worked in like at some animation studios before, just doing like character designs as well as background paintings, freelance. And I can't really show them here just because they're like client work, but I can show you some of the stuff that is like my own personal stuff that I would do on my spare time. So I do stuff like this. I tend to play a lot with like colors and very simple shapes because that's just like the thing that I enjoy the most.
Wow.
I
love your textures. There's so much texture work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's funny you mentioned that because like I don't actually use a lot of like textured brushes when I work. I tend to just use the lasso tool. Especially when I'm doing illustrations like these, it's mostly just noise texture that I've put on top after I finish drawing. So all the brushes I've used is just very basic brushes in Photoshop. and the lasso tool. That's pretty much what I've been using. So yeah, and today I will be doing character illustrations. So I'll talk more about this later, but I'm just going through them really quickly. But yeah, these are just some of my personal work. I don't have any client work on here at the moment, just because I don't know if they're okay for me to show like on Adobe Live. So can't exactly show them here.
Yeah. Sometimes it's really hard to tell, even when client work is out in the real world, if you're allowed to show it, or what you're supposed to say about it. I've heard that. From quite a few artists.
Yeah, so stuff like that. I also like to do a lot of like photo studies. So these are just taken straight from like pictures that I've taken, or just like photos I found on the internet, mostly just to practice like painting and just doing perspective and color. They're always fun to do, and I like doing them. And,
So you start with like an actual photo, and then you're overlaying it with like your illustration style to get that effect. Wow.
Yeah.
Super cool.
It's just a nice way. It's a nice way to just like practice painting, and so that's the kind of stuff that I do. Here's my Instagram. It's pretty much everything that you've seen on my website. But yeah, I do a lot of like more like personal stuff, like fun, like fan art stuff on here. So yeah, if you'd like to check that out, that's just that's the stuff that I like to do in my spare time.
Just there, you just before we get into it, you just showed some of the avatar like fan art that you created. I don't know if you remember this, but when you're on the last stream, I think you just created it, or you're in the middle of creating those. And I hadn't actually seen Avatar, and I can confirm that I have watched the entire series now. I loved it. So
yay, I'm
that was
so
because
happy
of you.
that you
I was
did.
like, I'm going to have to watch this. Like everyone in chat was like, yes, these are amazing. Avatar is so great. And we're talking about who everyone's favorite character was. And I was like, okay, this is it. It's time.
Yeah, that was really fun. Because I think back then they just like re-released on Netflix or something.
Yeah.
And everyone just like started rewatching them after like, I don't know, like I think it originally came out like, I don't know, years and years ago. And now I think they've created like a studio, like Avatar Studio, so they're going to release like new content in the future, and that's really exciting. Yeah, cool. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I do, and I'll probably jump straight into doing like what I'm supposed to be doing today, which is doing character illustration. So shall we get into it?
Let's do it. Sounds great. Apparently my mic was a little bit low, so I've turned it up. Hopefully that's a little bit better for everyone.
You sound fine too. So.
Sound all right?
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so I guess talking about character design, like character illustration, character design is actually my favorite. I don't know, cause like branch in animation, I guess, or just like in design in general. I do enjoy doing backgrounds as well, but like just doing characters for me personally, I've always loved doing characters since I was little. So it's something that's really like personal to me. And I do enjoy doing it a lot, just like in my spare time, just for fun. I guess like to start out, I guess like there are a couple of things that I usually keep in mind whenever I'm designing a character. First thing is always just to pay attention to like the personality of the character itself. That's always like the main thing. It's like usually people, like sometimes I make the mistake of going straight into like, okay, what kind of like cool things that I can put into the design without thinking so much about it. But like main thing is always find out what their personality is, like what are their likes and dislikes, and that will help inform your design decisions while you're actually designing the character. So make a list of those things before you, especially if you're designing for something that's like something that's actually significant. So make sure that you know what the character is like, and second of all, know what you're designing for, because so I've worked with book illustration as well as animation before, and they're two very different things. So if you're designing for a show, they're gonna need you to do like turnarounds for the characters, because obviously someone else is going to be working on those characters afterward. You're just designing them, or you're just doing a turnaround for them. And you have to keep in mind, even then, if it's like a 3D show or a 2D show, those are two very different things as well. If you're doing 3D, then you have to keep in mind the volumes, and they're very particular about it, because you're gonna hand them over to the 3D modelers and the riggers, and they're gonna have to use your drawings as a reference point to build the characters to move later on in 3D. I could say the same thing about 2D, because some of the shows nowadays, most of those shows actually are just like rigged, kind of like in Toon Boom or in like After Effects, things like that, to cut budget and make it a lot, like make the process a lot faster. So even then, you have to keep in mind like different things that you have to pay attention to. Like you have to make sure that the characters are simple enough for the animators to work on, and make sure that you put in all the details so that they can use your drawings as a reference point, because that's what character design is for. That's what character turnarounds are for. It's very different to when you're doing designs for illustration. Like for book illustration, I've done book illustrations before where the characters are very complicated, I guess, and it's not like you're not going to use them as much for, you're not going to draw them over and over again, so you put in a lot of detail, and they want a lot of detail in the drawing, so it's more like a one and done kind of illustration.
Right.
And it's very different from doing like what I'm doing now. Is like I'm doing book illustration, and like you have to draw the characters over and over again, like 40 pages of like that same character. But it's different from doing a character design for like a TV show, because you're doing it by yourself. Like I'm doing this book by myself with the art director and the writer. I have input from them, but like I'm doing all the art myself. So I have the design of the character in my head. I don't necessarily have to do the turnaround, because that's just gonna waste time. So I've just done like one character pose that's like enough for me to get all the information from. And by doing that, it's like you have to kind of get a lot of things done in one drawing. You have to get the shapes down. You have to pick a pose that will help you remember how the character is like, the expression, like just things like that. So you kind of like get a 2-in-1. You get like the shape of the character, design of the character, as well as the personality. And you kind of, I mean, I have it in my head. I know what he looks like in like side 3/4 view. Like I know how he looks like, so I don't have to necessarily draw a character turnaround.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that
silly question. Is a turnaround exactly what it sounds like? Like it's a couple of different angles, like, you know, the front and back, maybe the sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So something like this. Yeah. So it's like a
question.
3/4. Yeah. No, that's a fair question. A back and then a side view. And this is like a very simple version of it. I've done a turnaround where it's literally like 8 views of the same character, just like slightly different. And that's gonna really help the modelers and the riggers to build the characters in 3D. But yeah, something like this. This was a character that I did for my honors film, which I've shown before. But I'm just gonna show it again for like the purpose of this. Yeah, for this demo. So I had to do like a 3/4 back and side view, and that's kind of enough for me to get the information that I need. I don't necessarily have to do like a 3/4 back view, or like just small tweaks to like the angle of the characters. And also doing like an expression sheet, something like that would really help as well in like the production. So yeah.
Cool. And
going into like the character design itself, I guess there are also a couple things that I like to keep in mind whenever I'm doing character designs. So there's shape, silhouette, which I've also talked about before in my previous stream, line of action, the weight, the expression, and the color of the characters. Those are usually the 5 things that I pay attention to. But I'll probably get into 4 of those things today, which is shape, silhouette, line of action, weight, and expression. And I'll do colors in the second session, just because we don't have enough time.
Cool.
So I guess I'm talking about shape. That's probably like the main thing in character design, is that you get that cliche kind of like character design 101 of like, oh, if you use like a triangle, like I think everybody has like a perception about certain things, like about certain shapes. So like you have an association for a triangle, it's like sharp, so it's like dangerous, and you kind of use that to your advantage when you're designing characters. If you use like a circle or like an oval or something like that, something that's a bit softer, then you immediately associate that with a more friendlier character, something that's a bit softer, something that's a bit more innocent. So you can use that to your advantage by using it exactly as it's intended, or using it to subvert expectations, which you see a lot in like animated movies nowadays, like the kind of like the surprise villain character. Like you don't expect them to be bad, and then they're bad. Like like in Zootopia, or like if you look at Disney movies nowadays, they like to do like that surprise villain kind of aspect, like Wreck-It Ralph. Like they're all surprise villains. Like they look like a friendly character, and then they twist it at the end, and then they use it to their advantage to surprise the audience and like, oh, actually, like they're the bad guy. That's kind of like the intention.
As you were saying that, I was totally thinking of Zootopia.
Yeah, like the
lamb,
what's
the sheep?
I don't remember. Yeah, the sheep character. Like, yeah, and like she looks really innocent, really friendly, and then you get, that surprise at the end. Oh, actually, like she's the bad guy. Yeah, even like in Frozen, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, Hans, like he's a good-looking guy. He's like a prince, and like he's the bad guy. Like that's kind of like, I guess, one example of like using shape and using shape language to subvert expectations. Or you can use it as it is. Like if you want to do like a bad guy character that's obviously, evil looking, that's also a fair point. I guess like I usually, whenever I'm designing a character, I tend to kind of break them down to like the simplest shapes. So if you look at like what I have on screen now, like you can probably break this down to like the simplest shapes. I'm just gonna lower that opacity and kind of go over this. So like, for example, like with this lady, it's just like, it's kind of like a half circle. Like that's kind of like the shape. And this guy is kind of like, like that inverted, like, not really, it's kind of like a triangle, but not really. It's like a rectangle. Yeah, that kind of shape. Or you can combine like different shapes together. You can have like that circle, and then you have like a half circle and something like that. Like it's basically, you can break these down to like very simple shapes. And it'll help as well when you're looking at like a cast of characters to see like the silhouette of the characters and immediately know who they are just by looking at. If I were to change this into like just all black, hopefully you'll be able to tell, which ones are which. And I can show you like more examples with that. Sorry, let me just find one. No. Okay, yeah, with this one as well. Like even like this one, this is like a bit more obvious because like the character design is a lot simpler. So again, like you can see like the circle, another circle, like it's very simple. And then you've got like this like, very thin rectangular shape. And that's kind of like, that's it, like that's the design. And obviously you can add on details afterwards. And I think another thing that I like to do is kind of just contain, like having the details within the shape and not having it go out of that shape, because it's easier for like the animators to animate afterwards. You can just have like the wing, like one shape, and have the details inside instead of having like, like something like that. Which would be really difficult to do, and you have to do like follow through and a lot of like additional animation on top of that. So I guess like that's kind of like the purpose of that. Again, like with this guy, it's just like that one shape, and it's very simple, and you can kind of tell what's going on right away.
Yeah. So thinking about those simple shapes, is that a big part of strictly when you're working with animation, or is that something that you always do? Because you sort of mentioned keeping it within the shape can, like, animators are going to be your best friend from understanding that sort of thing, because you're saving them time if that's the style. Or do you do that across the board for all concept work, fan art and thinking? Are you always thinking about shapes?
I think it's always good to have like a shape guideline for anything. Like if you're designing for a specific show or for a book, I always tend to have like a shape language that I stick to. Like if I'm going to use triangles for the whole thing, I'm going to use triangles for everything. Like they're all going to have sharp edges, because that's just the shape language that I've decided on. So I think always having that is always important, whatever it is you're working on. But yeah, I guess like mostly I'm talking more in like the perspective of like an animator. And I've kind of because my background was animation. Like I studied animation, both 2D and 3D, and now going into doing concept art and illustration. And I've kind of used that, like I've translated that over to my work now. So again, with something like this, it's the same thing. I'm just repeating myself just to kind of like make that point of,
it's great to see the different applications.
Yeah, so even like this, you can see like with the girl, like she has a lot of details in her hair, but if you kind of like look at her from far away and squint, you can just see like that basic triangle shape, again another triangle shape, and like a circle. That's pretty much the whole thing, and you can add in details afterwards inside of that shape. Yeah.
Nice.
So another thing that I wanted to talk about is line of action and like posing and weight. because that's like a really big thing for me as well. Like I used to struggle a lot with drawing characters that look like they're actually standing up, like on the page instead of just kind of floating. Especially if you're just drawing a character on like a blank page like this, and you can't really, it's kind of hard to kind of like have that weight be like right. I guess like one rule of thumb for me is to just have the head and the feet kind of like in one line, even if they're leaning to the side. Like the line of action is that, because line of action is kind of like, like from the back of the spine to the legs, but you can see that the head and the legs are kind of like in one line. I mean, obviously with this character, with the dad character, it's like just one line. That's like an easy one.
Right.
But if you have like a character that's kind of like leaning over, like the mom, you can still see, you can have that curve, but having that kind of like, that line, having the head and the feet in one line will really help in selling the weight of the character. When I say weight, like I don't necessarily mean that the character is heavy. It's more like having the weight rest, on the ground, like having it be like it's being pulled by gravity. So that's, I guess, like an example of that.
Yeah, that's a great tip. That's not something that I would have thought of.
Yeah, I guess like it took me a while as well. I mean, like you hear it all the time when you're doing like character design classes and things like that. But like, it's just like a good point to reiterate. Like I guess like with this one, like you have like this pose of like this girl dancing, and you can see like that there's like this like clear line of action, and the head's not necessarily in line with the feet, but I've done that intentionally because the pose is like she's like dancing, so she's like a bit off balance, and I've done it intentionally. She's not actually just like standing up, and so that's like that's like an okay example of like breaking that rule, is like not having them align, because if you've intentionally done it because of the posing of the character. So something like that, I guess. Again, like with all of these like character drawings, because I've done like some poses for these, and like you can see like a very clear line of action right away, because that's gonna help you exaggerate the character when you're designing it. That's what I do as well when I'm doing like, that's why it's important to do like gesture drawings, because you have like, when you're doing gesture drawings or like live drawings of like models, they only give you like sometimes like 15 seconds to lock in a pose, and then you don't get to like draw the feet individually, like draw like the shoulders and like pay attention to everything. You look at the pose, and then you draw a line, and then you kind of, it makes everything easier. So I think knowing your line of action from the very beginning is like a good way to start out a character.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think Golden Rose is the same as me. I wouldn't have thought, just mentioned in chat, I wouldn't have thought of that point of balance between the head and the foot and the feet. That's exactly what I was thinking. I think it's a really great point, something cool.
And I think you can really notice that in every single drawing. Like, I mean, obviously, this is kind of like an easy stance. It's like, okay, well, the head's like, again, it's like in line with the feet. Like you can see the balance right there, even though he's like slightly leaning forwards, you can still see that kind of balance in the middle. So
super cool. Hey, we have another question from chat. Do you have any tips when it comes to gesture drawing?
I guess like with gesture drawing, again, like first thing is like just notice the line of action, and then just like pick one point that you feel comfortable drawing first. For me, it's the torso, just because it's like the midpoint of the body, and so having it be, once you have the line of action, you draw the torso, and then you kind of like go from there. I don't usually draw the head first. I don't know why. Like for me, it's just kind of, it's more difficult for me to kind of like have the character look right and balance when I draw the character, the person like head first, and then I kind of just draw the body first. For me, it just helps a lot. Not sure why. I think it's like just personal preference. I think maybe because it's in the middle of, it's like the middle part of the body. It's like the biggest section of the body. So it's, once you have that down, it's easier for you to like just add in the legs and like the arms. So something like that.
Cool.
So So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be doing a character illustration, not necessarily for animation or anything. It's just something for fun. And I guess I'm going to be drawing a couple characters. I'm not just going to be doing one. And I think when you're doing something like that, you have to pay attention to like the character interactions, and make sure that you know what their relationships are. And that's really going to help you in deciding on a pose, deciding on an expression when you're doing that. So what I'm going to be doing today is I've just randomly picked like a prompt, which is like a nanny character, and then like two kids, like two spoiled like kids, that's being like, being taken care of by this like grandma, like nanny character. So I've just gone on Pinterest and I've just looked at some references. I picked out like some images of like the costumes and like just like different prep school kids, like boarding school kids, as well as some.
I love
like,
the photo of the granny on the scooter.
On the scooter, yeah, it's really cute. Yeah. So just find references that you think will help you in deciding on what costumes they're gonna wear and things like that. So I've just like kind of put them on one board, and I always do this whenever I'm doing anything. I have a reference board to the side that I can always look at and reference. Or just have your Pinterest on there. I also have I have like a small library of like art books that I go to as well. But generally speaking, I usually have this. So I guess like for the purpose of this demo, I've just picked out like one image of this grandma just to make it easier for me to design. And
I didn't realize we were going to be illustrating grannies, but for some reason I'm so excited. She looks like so nice.
Oh gosh. Okay. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to be doing this grandma, and there are a couple different ways for me usually to start designing a character. So with this process, I've just picked out one image of this grandma, and I'm probably going to
just change the song. That was
so I've done like. Yeah, I was just about to say, like, can you maybe turn down the music a little bit? Okay. So, usually what I do is I'll just lower the opacity and do like an observation. So there are several steps whenever I'm doing character design is first like reference, and then I observe and just do, drawings of that particular subject matter. So if say I'm drawing grandmas for today, I'll just do like a page of like grandma observations. Or if I'm doing like a crocodile character, I'll just do a page of just crocodiles, and I'll iterate from there and exaggerate certain features that I feel like will help me convey the character, the personality of that character. I guess like with this, like the biggest, like the defining shape of this character is probably like this huge cape. It's pretty much her biggest feature, and then you kind of get like that silhouette, and you have like that body that's kind of like that shape. It's kind of like that shape, but it's very subtle. And then you've got like the tiny legs, and then you've got that kind of like shape, like almost like two circles, like that. And so once I have that down, I'll go ahead and do,
oh wow,
iterations.
Here's one you prepared earlier.
Yeah, I'll probably do like iterations of that character. I'll exaggerate certain features. I'll lower that opacity, and then I'll go over it and see like which parts I can push and pull, and like exaggerate further. So I guess with this one, I've kind of pushed like her skirt up, and I've exaggerated that shape that I talked about at the beginning, like having that like kind of body shape, but I've just pushed that up, because I guess like I wanted this grandma nanny character to be a bit more stern. I know she looks really friendly in the reference image, but I want her to look a bit more like, like a bit more up, like a bit more tough. Right. It's almost like she's looking down at you. So I've kind of like pushed that body up. And again, like further, when you go into like this one, I've pushed that shape even further and almost changed it into like this kind of shape. Yeah, so that's kind of like my design process is. Yeah.
Really,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's really great. I think it's a good point as well. Like from the reference point, you're starting with this reference point, but you really can go in like a much crazier direction. Like you've changed it quite a lot from the original reference point, which I think is something important for us to consider as well. There was a question just around researching, getting reference as well, by JB. He asks, do you create Pinterest boards, or do you just Google search, depending on the project at the time? Like, do you have a big library of things like on something like Pinterest, or do you just every time you do a job, you just Google?
No, I'll have a Pinterest board. Especially if it's for a job, I'll definitely have a Pinterest board of just like one thing. I really need to like sort them out, but like I usually have like reference boards for everything. But if it's just something quick, I'll just like do a quick Google search and just like, okay, well, I need to see what like the hull of a ship looks like. I'll just quickly Google that. But if it's like for a specific character or for a specific prop that I am not really familiar with, I usually have a board that's just of that image. And I'll source it from different places as well. So that's why I use Pinterest mostly to, like collate my images.
Cool.
So going back to this is that, again, like looking at like the initial trace of that grandma, you can see like, okay, well, she has like tiny legs. And you can like exaggerate that further and have her have like really tiny legs. That's kind of like the point of exaggeration, is to help you convey the character in a way that's, communicating the personality of the character. Again, like if you see her and she looks a bit more friendlier, how can you make her look a bit more, like tougher, like a bit more like stern and have like a commanding aura? Like that's kind of like the point of it. And then have the posing change as well. Like, if she's holding the cane this way, she has like her arm down, like extended forward, so she has like a more like commanding kind of like pose, and also having like I guess it's a clear silhouette as well compared to the initial trace of the reference, because here everything is inside this huge cape. Like you can't see anything else. Like having her arm go forward and then the cane in an angle will help like create direction. And create just more visual interest in the character. So something like that. So how much time do we have left?
So we've got about 22 minutes left.
All right. Cool. Oh, I guess this is like another like quick example that I've done. Like I didn't end up using, but like again, it's the same thing with this. It's like just looking at the reference, and she looks very like just like like exaggerating that pose. So there's kind of like that direction. Yeah. You can kind of see it in the reference, but then you push it a bit more, so that you're it's just more interesting to look at.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you said at the beginning with the weight, and now as you show these explorations, you can totally see like how you do it in the sketches. There's just two questions that I might just ask really quickly that have come through. One was how many sketch explorations would you do? Is that a how long's a piece of string kind of question? If I
have the time, I wouldn't stop. Like that's the problem. It's like you can just keep going. You can just keep doing more and more and more versions. That's the problem, is that you don't really know when to stop. So having a deadline is actually good, because I think like you can pretty much push any character in any direction you want. Like if you give me like a month to do one character, I will take that month and I will do like 100 different iterations if I can. Just because it's just like there's so many ways to explore one character. So I would say that it's kind of like you can't really put a cap on it, but you have to. So
right.
Yeah.
So it might be a time limit rather than amount of explorations or something you have to move on to get to the next phase.
Yeah, sometimes I don't know, it kind of depends. Like sometimes you draw one character and then you like it right away, and you kind of just want to stick with it. Like the more exploration you do, the more you want to stick with that first one. But usually that's not the case. Usually you'll get to a point where you'll do one that's better than the first one. There's always something better than the first initial design that you've done. Even how, doesn't matter how much you love it, you're gonna come up with something better later on. Like even if you want to incorporate certain aspects from the first iteration, you're still gonna come up with something that's better later on. So my initial rule of thumb is like just do more, like and pick out the best ones, like pick out certain aspects that you like from different iterations and kind of like mush them together. And you create one that's like, that's good. Cool. Yeah, so I guess we should probably go ahead, and I don't know if we so we've got like 20 minutes maybe left, maybe about less, because
20,
about 20 minutes. Okay. I guess like since I've already kind of like shown you like the rough, I'm probably going to stick with this this grandma on the bottom right as like a rough. It's like a rough design. Oops. It's like a rough design, and then kind of like iterate from there and kind of just like add in details.
Cool. I noticed that this is like you're using like red, like a lot of people use blue lines. Do you always use like a red color?
Yeah, so there's actually, I think there's like a reasoning behind that. That's like with old animators, like old Disney animators, they use like non-photo blue pencils. I think I've talked about this as well in my previous stream, is that they use that because when you scan those lines, they're not going to appear in like the final image. So it's really going to help with like shortening, like that whole process. And like it just helps to have a different color, because like when you're doing cleanup, like you're going to use like a black color. Like it's just easier to see your sketch lines that way. So I usually either use like a blue or a red color, just because that's what I'm used to looking at. So right now I'm just kind of like going in and adding in like the small details that you couldn't see before. So like the fingers, like the little like details in the clothing and things like that. Because like in the initial sketch, I was just really focused on getting that shape down. And now I can go in and I can like add in like the details. So I haven't done, sorry?
I was just going to say, are you using like a different kind of weight here? Like the original one was quite thick and rough, and then you're using like just a finer point?
Yeah. Just a slightly finer point, just to kind of help.
A couple of comments in chat as we're going along. Great tip for exaggeration. Using the opacity is really helpful to see which part can be pushed further. Yeah, that's right.
Super cool. So I guess like with this one, because like I've already pushed it enough, like because I showed like the kind of like, a subtler version of the grandma here, and I've kind of pushed her to the point where I think it looks good. I think pushing something a bit too far might not look as appealing. So sometimes I do that, and I just kind of like revert. I go back and kind of like tone it down a little bit, just so it still looks right. Like I can probably push this even further, but I wouldn't. I guess like another thing that I tend, like a cheap way to do it, I guess, is to kind of like use like a selection tool. Like, okay, well, say if I want to make her body even wider, like I'll just use a selection tool. I'll go to like edit, and then I'll go like distort or something, and I'll like push that even further. Like I would do that, like to see if that would work. But yeah, if I even go to like distort or like warp and just like push in, just push up, something like that.
Yeah. So
just like small changes. Like, okay, well, if I like how that looks, I'll keep it. Like I'll just keep that.
It's like a quick way to kind of just do a quick experiment. What happens if I squeeze it? Is it too far? Is it, how far can I push this?
Yeah, and if I don't like it, I'll just go back. I'll just undo it. I'll just go back to a previous version. Yeah. So yeah, something like that. So I guess I haven't really done the kids yet. So again, I'm looking back at the references. This is mostly like costume references, I guess. And I'll just do this, just look at them, like generally, and then just like pick out things that stands out to me. Again, because this is like a simplified version of it. You're not gonna get a lot of like the little details. of the costume, but you just kind of want the general idea of it. All right. So I'm just going to like, again, like whenever I'm like sketching something, like I would just start with like kind of like the very simple shapes and kind of squeeze and like stretch from there and exaggerate from there. Again, doing this and keeping in mind like the line of action, like that kind of line. Again, like with this one, so I want this like boy character, like the kids to be fighting. Like that's kind of the idea in the scene, is like they're fighting over like a dog or something. And I've purposely drawn him off balance because he's like leaning forward. He's a bit off balance, so I'm not. You can see like the head and like the legs aren't on the same line. So that's kind of like breaking the rules on purpose, I guess.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And do you have to think about things like kids having like a lower center of gravity as well, compared to some someone that's a lot taller or like round shapes? Is that something that you keep into like consideration?
Yeah, of course. I guess like I think whatever it's not necessarily just kids. Like if it's just like a smaller character, then obviously they're going to have like a different point of balance. Like just kind of like see whatever you feel would work the best. Just play around with it a little bit.
Super cool. So we've got about 12 minutes left. If anybody has any more questions, just a little bit more time to hang out. We're going to be back to pick up where we left off. Same time on Thursday, so in 2 days, just so you guys know. Don't miss it. We'll be back with Yori again.
So I guess like with me, like doing roughs, at this point, I feel like that's already enough information for me to move ahead. Again, because I'm doing this like very quickly for the purpose of this demo. So I'm just going to like start with a shape, like have like that shape. Okay, well. I guess like since we don't have much time left, I'm probably just going to show you like a finished rough, because again, like usually it will take me a couple different passes to get to a point where I'm happy with it. So I guess like with this, I'll just put that away for now, and I'll show you like a finish kind of. Well, it's still really rough, but for me this is finished. This is a finished rough, I guess, because like I have all the information that I need. And I'm happy with the shapes, because that's the purpose of a rough, is to just kind of get the design down, get the the idea of it down.
Yeah.
And I guess if we have enough time, I'll probably get into doing the clean lines, just for a little bit, and just tell you what I do when I do that. Yeah.
And have you always worked in Photoshop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's like the first program that I've used. Just because I think back then, I mean, that's like Photoshop is like the major kind of like, I started out by just doing like edits and photo edits and things like that, and then getting into buying a tablet and then drawing in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with my brush settings, I usually make sure that I have shape dynamics on. And I turn like the minimum diameter down, and you can change this around. I usually have scattering on and transfer as well. So shape dynamics is good because you want to have like that taper, so you get like a more like organic line out of it. I also like to turn smoothing on just by a little bit, just to help me have a smoother line. And that's pretty much my brush settings.
Nice. And so that's to do with the pressure sensitivity of using a stylus of some kind, like a tablet, or that you lift off at the end with the shape dynamics. Yeah. Have you ever tried to do your style like with a mouse or anything like that, or is it just impossible?
Oh, that's kind of, yeah, that's probably impossible. I'm not good enough to do something like that.
I thought I'd ask. Yeah.
Yeah. I started out with like a smaller tablet. I used oh, I'm trying to remember what's the name of the tablet. Intuos, I think.
Intuos, yep.
Yeah, it was Wacom Intuos tablet. That was like the first tablet I had, and I used that for quite a while. And it's very difficult to get like very clean lines just because you're not drawing directly on screen. Yep. And so that really impacted me, like just like, you know, style wise, because I was more comfortable with doing kind of like more painted styles instead of like line, just because they're very hard to, you know, get right. So
and what do you use now? I'm going to guess like using a Cintiq or something, like a Wacom Cintiq.
Yeah, I'm using a Wacom Cintiq now. I'm drawing directly on screen, and it does help a lot. I draw on the iPad a lot as well when I'm just like at home.
I think your style would work really well with Fresco as well. Do you ever play around with Fresco, or have you ever used Photoshop on the iPad or anything like that?
Yeah, I use Fresco as well on my iPad because they have like some really nice brushes as well. Like I don't remember what they're called exactly, but like live brushes, like they kind of simulate watercolors and things like that. It's really fun to play around with. And I don't like customize my brushes on there as much as I do in Photoshop, just because I mean it's more convenient to do it here, and I'm just more used to it. So I just use like the default brushes, and they're good enough. So yeah, I mean I don't use like my iPad to draw a lot of like the finished drawings. Like it's mostly like for fun. Like for work, I would just use Photoshop and my tablet, my Cintiq.
Right. Yeah. So like for commercial work, like for serious stuff, you want to kind of finish off, you know, you're much more at home with the full kind of system, and it's more playing around or exploration or sitting on the couch with the iPad.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you're using like a different color here as well. Like, is this something that helps you kind of separate the sketching from the actual like line work?
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
Like, is it black but with a transparency or anything, or is it like a charcoal? What are you actually drawing with?
It's just a black. It's just a black.
Just black,
I think it's like it's got. Yeah, I think it's just got a little bit of like texture. I got this brush. I think it was like from because a lot of people ask me, like I just use like the Kyle brushes that's also available in Photoshop.
Yep.
As a default, I think, because it didn't used to be, but then I think they managed to like work together with like, I think it was like Kyle Webster, his name.
Yep.
And then now they have it.
Right.
Yeah, now they have it in here. But I also use like other brushes. I recently downloaded I bought like this brush from like, I think it's called like True Grit Supplies or something. Yeah. Something like that. Have like a lot of like interesting like Photoshop presets for like for like brushes, as well as just effects and paper textures and things like that. That's like fun to play around with.
Yeah, Kyle does a lot of streaming on Adobe Live. I think Festus was just chatting about Kyle. I'm pretty sure they just released like another like 100 brushes or something last week.
Oh,
so
crazy.
There's like no shortage of brushes to use. And Andrew Fairclough, who does True Grit, is actually an Australian. So there you go.
Oh, cool.
Australian over in the UK, I think.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
I didn't even know that, so good to know. That's cool. I think it's like the ad just kept popping up on my Instagram, and I was like, this is proof that ads actually work. Like it just kept popping up on my Instagram, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. Like I'm kind of looking for new brushes, so I'm gonna try that out. But yeah, usually I tend to like stick to just a couple brushes that I'm comfortable with, and even though I have like hundreds and hundreds of brushes, downloaded so many different artist packs and things like that, and they just don't work for me. Like out of like, if it's like a pack of like a 50 brush pack, I'll just pick one. I'll just use one out of like 50, and
Right.
I'll add that to my collection of like 10 brushes that I've used the past like 10 years. Yeah. I think there's always this like misconception about having like the right brush, and like if you buy an artist brush, you'll get to like kind of emulate their style, but it's really not that. Like I used to have that like misconceptions, like, oh well, like if I download like this person's brush, then it'll help me emulate their style. Like it does to a certain degree, but then once you use it, you're like, well, this is not what I expected. Like this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel comfortable for me to use. So I'll have to like customize it and change it in a way that it feels right for me and my tablet. Because because I've got like a small setup at home as well. I've got like I've got like a smaller Cintiq, because I'm using the big one in the studio, and I've got like a small like 13 HD, an older like Cintiq that I use at home, and they feel very different. And so when I'm using even if I'm using the same brush on there, I'm gonna change the settings just because the pressure sensitivity is different on that tablet.
Oh wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, like I'm constantly adjusting and readjusting a brush whenever I'm working.
And it's just by feel, like just how it feels at the time, how it feels on the device and on the day.
Yeah.
Golden Rose in chat says, sometimes the differences between brushes are so subtle, I can hardly notice the difference.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens when there's hundreds of thousands out there.
Yep. I think having like a set of brushes that you're comfortable in using, like have like 10 brushes that you're okay with, and just constantly use, it's kind of helpful in defining your kind of like painting style as well, your drawing style. It gives you more consistency that way, because like if you're constantly changing brushes, like your work's not gonna look as consistent. Like that's kind of maybe why I prefer using the lasso tool when I'm like painting. Just because like I used to constantly change brushes. Like I'll just try every single like fancy brush that's out there, and it just doesn't help with the quality of my painting, because I'm constantly trying to get used to the feel of the brush instead of paying attention to like the more important things, which are like the color and like the perspective of the drawing. And like I'm like thinking about like, have I used this brush correctly? Like I don't know if this texture looks right here, and
right.
Kind of like, and it just looks really like muddy and like wrong. So yeah, just be careful with that, because I tend to fall into that trap a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. Hey, we've only got about a minute left, so we might need to say our goodbyes. Actually, we're going to be picking up. I told you it goes fast, especially the first one. We've always got so many questions for you, but there was a lot of people in chat as well, sort of saying, yeah, lots of like really important like bits of knowledge just being dropped there. There's like all these little nuggets that you drop as you're going along, which is really useful. We'll pick up this conversation and the drawing on Thursday. So that's Thursday in Australia. We're going a little bit later in the week. I think it's 9 o'clock, is it, in the morning in Jakarta for you over there? It's like Wednesday
it's like
night or something in the US. So time zones always confuse the heck out of me. But yeah, it's been fantastic hanging out with you. I'm looking forward to Thursday as well. And thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Yori.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll see you on Thursday.
See you Thursday. Bye.
Bye.